We will have 4 experts presenting bio-based and biodegradable plastics. And the experts are ranging from research institutes, network organizations to plastic industry in Southeast Asia. First of all, I would like to say thank you for your availability, sharing your knowledge and experience with us. And we have also until now around 100 participants registered from all over the world. So it really shows that this is quite a highly anticipated topic for us to discuss together. And not to make further delay, I would invite our first speaker of the day, Ms. Napapor Newberg. She is the advisor and national coordinator of Capsules in Thailand, and she will explain brief information about Capsules and our activities. Ms. Napaporn, please, the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Geeta. Yeah, allow me to provide some background about our preparation of this webinar. Yeah, this webinar is organized by our project called Capsules. Capsules stands for Collaborative Action for Single-Use Plastic Prevention in Southeast Asia. Yeah, and we work in 3 countries, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Next slide, please, Geeta. Yes, and our project objective, we aim to assist the 3 countries to prevent single-use plastic and to prepare for reuse, supporting the implementation of the single-use plastic prevention policy. And our project run until March 2023 under the budget of 3 million euro from the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature, Conservation and Nuclear Safety, or in short, BNU. Yeah, next slide, please. For our philosophies, our project work, based on the circular plastic economy principles that are created by Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Let me tell you a little bit about the new plastic economy principle that contains 3 ambitions over the material streams. You can see from this slide. The number 1, creating an effective after-use plastic economy is the cornerstone of the new plastic economy and its first priorities. And not only it is critical to capture more material values and increase resource productivity, it also provides a direct economic incentive to avoid leakage into natural systems. You can see the number 2, and helps enabling the transition to renewable source feedstock by reducing its scale. You can see number 3. Slide, please. And what is our project intervention? According to these principles, we work with partners to consider the issues on recycled content targets, supporting the circular economy policy framework like regulatory, economic, and fiscal measures. We help partners to design for recycling to develop the standard on the design for recycling, as well as developing the single-use plastic prevention policy, focusing on reuse packaging models. You can see in the central part. Next slide, please. Yes, and the objective of the dialogue series, which today is one of the series, we aim to bring together experts around the world and the practitioners from industries in order to exchange knowledge from their practice and from theories, and then create the new idea and create environment ecosystem that to help partner do it together in order to reduce single-use plastic from the upstream. Okay, and let me show you a little bit what the series are. Yeah, we prepare 6 topics, yeah, of the series. And today is a topic that focuses on bio-based and biodegradable plastic. And the next years, yeah, we aim to prepare additional 2 topics that focus on the role and the scope of municipalities in preventing. Sorry, yeah, I got like my skin, yeah, always like got like new people add on. Okay, again, sorry. Yeah, and next year we will come up with like 2 additional dialogue series. And the first one will focus on the role and the scope of municipalities in preventing and reducing single-use plastic. And the last one, we will like review our study, yeah, in Germany and also in Thailand and some other countries in the Southeast Asia, yeah, to share knowledge about the economic and fiscal measures that can bring to the reduction of the plastic, the single-use plastic consumption in this country. Yeah, that's it from my end. Yeah, and I hope that you can stay with us, yeah, until next year. Yeah, and our last dialogue series will take place around April or May. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah,
Thank you, Kuncheri.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Kuncheri. And now I think it's good to start understanding a broad picture of bio-based and biodegradable plastics. And for that, we have Ms. Clara Lowe from UCO Institute. She's the researcher in UCO Institute and will explain the concept and concerns about bio-based and biodegradable plastics. Based on our publication as our pre-study that is available to be downloaded online later in our Knowledge Hub. So, Ms. Clara Lowe, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here and I hope everybody can hear me. Thanks a lot also for your interest in our event and the topic today. I will start my presentation why bio-based and biodegradable plastics are not part of the solution to reduce plastic waste with some intro on the terms of biodegradability and bio-based content. So whereas the first describes the input material into a production of plastics, the second refers to an end-of-life characteristic. And this can either mean that it degrades in the ambient environment, but also in industrial organic waste management plants. And biodegradability does not cover the oxidegradable plastics, which are fossil-based and to which an additive is added that facilitates fragmentation, but no total disintegration of the plastics. And those, the oxidegradable plastics, are even forbidden in the EU, and regulations apply as well in Malaysia and Thailand, for example. As bio-based and biodegradability refer to 2 different characteristics of a material. A certain polymer can, of course, be bio-based and biodegradable, but can also only be either bio-based or either biodegradable. And you can see this in the figure on the right-hand side of the slide. Representatives exist for each and every of these quarters of this chart. So in white, the fossil-based non-biodegradable polymers, and in the right lower corner, the polymers that have both characteristics, with famous representatives, for example, polylactic acid and also starch plants. This slide shows some volumes and shares of bio-based and biodegradable plastics. Packaging is the sector which is most important for these types of plastic. And even though it was only 1% in 2018 of all plastic packaging material in the EU, it refers to 300,000 tons per year. And Malaysia and Thailand are very keen in producing those types of plastic and consume 10 to 20% of its own volumes produced. So, and the interest in this webinar today also shows how important the topic is. But still, we are at the beginning, and the discussion can start around this very interesting and also risky material, let's say, you'll hear throughout my presentation. Okay, I'm now addressing the bio-based and the biodegradable plastics each in 1 or 2 slides separately, and starting with the bio-based plastic. Bio-based is used as a synonym to describe a renewable resources or the renewable origin of the material, in contrast to conventional plastic, where the basis is crude oil. And sometimes plastic packaging can be called bio-based, even though it only consists of a certain share of renewable material. Therefore, the European market is always referring to bio-based plastics in combination with the EN standard displayed here, and this defines the bio-based plastics. There are various third-party verification schemes that also use this standard as a basis to standardize bio-based plastics. Now, a little more in detail how we come from the plants to the polymers. As to see on the yellow cards, the sources of renewable material are agricultural products that serve as food, for example, tapioca, cassava, potato, but also certain palm species, or which we prefer, mixed agricultural wastes. And the black boxes, I hope you can see my cursor. So the upper black box and the lower black box describe 2 different ways of manufacturing bio-based plastics, either through a polymerization of bio-based monomers. For example, we have a carbohydrate from any of these sources. We take out the glucose and the derivatives. They are fermented, and so we obtain bio-based monomers, and they are polymerized to become, for example, polylactic acid. This is the first type of processing or becoming a plastic item. The second is that we focus on starch or cellulose. They are biopolymers already, so they are polymers already, and they are processed to become a plastic item. These 2 different ways of plastic are possible. So some famous examples already, as I said, the polylactic acid, also a group of polymers that is bio-based but not biodegradable. These are the drop-in plastics. They are traditional polymer types, but based on materials from natural origin. And then we have the starch, as I explained. This is already a biopolymer, and it becomes a thermoplastic through some modification steps. Now to the end of life, to the biodegradability, which is a sequence of 2 processes, the fragmentation in the first, where shorter polymer chains are formed, followed by the mineralization step. And in this second step, microorganisms completely break down the chemical structure of the polymer. Both steps need to be proven before any polymer can be called a biodegradable polymer. Various parameters that are listed also on the slide, the temperature, etc., they control these reactions, and they are different in different settings. For example, in industrial organic waste treatment, they are different, of course, than in the ambient environment. And as a result, we need to understand that biodegradability solely depends on the type of chemical bonds in a polymer. So there are some chemical bonds that microorganisms can break down and others they can't. And so the use of renewable resources is no indicator for biodegradability. And this explains also why there are fossil-based biodegradable polymers and some which are bio-based but not biodegradable. Now, as the conditions are very different for biodegradability in different surrounding, most obvious for the salinity, for example, of fresh water and marine water, which you find in the 2 bottom lines of this table. The degradation depends on the conditions that exist in these various environments, as earlier mentioned, and such as the presence of oxygen, for example. So this influences the degradation times. We have some representatives of the biodegradable polymers in the top, and then you can see how long it takes for them to degrade in various environments. And we can even see that some takes over years, and this is also the reason why why it's so difficult also to use this term biodegradability. As I said, the conditions are different in this system, and also the standards that or labels, eco-labels that certify biodegradability, they are different. As you can see, there are 3 different types of DIN certificates, for example, which are industrial compostable, home compostable, or biodegradable in soil. Also, this OK compost symbol is different. We have this the home or industrial mentioned in the right lower corner of this symbol, and still this is so small changes. The OK compost is even more present in this label, so you can see we start getting a little confused here. I'm pretty sure we'll hear about this also later. But yeah, for you to know, there are various standards, also global ones, referring to different environments. Now we come to the slides where we start to focus this discussion a little more on the real end-of-life conditions, and not only the ones in the laboratory, for example, or the tests that were made. This graphic, you can see different types of input material on top in the blue cards, and they are processed into polymers that are differentiated in the pink cards. For example, as I already mentioned, the biopolymers, with also the bio-based monomers and composite materials, fossil-based, for example, those ones in the pink cards. And the end-of-life scenarios are in green. And the thicker an arrow is, the more likely is that the plastic follows this route. From left to right, the ambient composting is not so likely to happen at the end of life, as the degradation times are quite long and conditions need to be very specific for full biodegradability. So often, most of all these plastics are not ambient composting. Then with regards to the industrial composting, it's a little more likely, provided, of course, that a industrial composting plant exists in the country where the waste is generated. And but we'll see that this is not the case for all the countries. So, and also provided that the biodegradable plastic ends up in this facility. This is also a very important point in terms of logistics. For example, it's not the case for all the biodegradable material that is collected together with the plastic waste, because the sorting is so difficult. So, as you can see, mainly the arrows point out to the combustion of plastics or sometimes to recycling. We see that that most of the hoped ideas of the biodegradability will not become true in the end of life. Now, this slide, I'm coming a little to the impacts of bio-based and biodegradable plastic, and this slide could require a presentation on its own. It represents, of course, the core of my presentation and relates to the impacts of bio-based and biodegradable materials and the threats of hoping too much of the benefits associated with these materials. So I'll start with the risks associated with the bio-based materials. We have seen LCH studies that show a lower impact for the climate change category. So this seems to be an advantage of bio-based materials. However, if we evaluate and assess other categories, for example, the eutrophication, we also see that they are higher for the bio-based materials than for conventional plastics. So it's very important that the impact shifts somehow from playing a major role with the climate change category, now coming to shift to other categories that are more related to harvesting and cultivation of the raw materials. Another very important point relates to the impact on biodiversity. This is very difficult to measure, but has very many implications. And we have, for example, the land use. If we again refer to the different types of bio-based materials, the food, the palms, and also the agricultural waste. Against the background that food security should be ensured all the time, we will have conflicts with the land use. And also monoculture is an important point. So if we put all plants in one point, we we have certain issues with pesticides, with ecotoxicity. All this is difficult to measure, and but still a very huge impact on the biodiversity. Now, what are specific risks associated with the biodegradable material? And they relate, of course, to the desired end-of-life scenario, which would be the ambient degradation. But this is not very realistic, as the conditions are so different. For example, you can see the soil is very different also in Middle Europe, where I am now, compared to Southeast Asian beaches, for example. And to design a polymer this specific is not really possible. So in the end, we will have the first step of the biodegradable done. So the fragmentation, we'll have a lot of microplastics in the soils, for example, but we will not follow will not have the second step, the full mineralization, as for example, the microorganisms are not ready in a certain place to digest the microplastics. We have also some technical issues, for example, with regards to the recycling. The polylactic acid, it's so-called recycling incompatibility in the PET recycling. And also we start to get maybe a little confused with the terms already. This is because biodegradability is unclear to consumers, because it mainly only refers to industrial composting, and which is not the case in my home composter, and which is also not the case in the forests. So we start, but we think that it would be. So we start that one thinks that littering may be not so problematic, because it can degrade in the environment. And we have some overasking risks that include, for example, hazardous substances, which are comparable amounts present in the conventional as well as the bio-based materials. The standards are barely used, and also often we start confusing the consumers, and we'll surely hear about that from Sami later. So this is only a short set of impacts, and I will present one in more specific, which is the dimension of the risk of the so-called regrettable substitution, thus a substitution of one single-use item through another. And a study has quantified this dimension of the needs of renewable feedstock if the total volume of globally used plastic prevention was substituted through bio-based materials. And two numbers are quite impressive. Half of the amount of corn produced today would be needed, together with all the castor beans and the wood. And also, these renewable sources would require the total area of Thailand and 60% of Europeans' annual freshwater withdrawal. So we see that changing total plastic sector to the bio-based materials will rather be impossible, let's say. I'm now coming a little to the status quo of these types of plastics and regulation in various countries. For example, I'm starting with the EU. 3 different legislation mentioned the bio-based and biodegradable plastics in the EU: the Waste Framework Directive, the Packaging Waste Directive, and the Single-Use Plastics Directive. And especially the WFD and also the Single-Use Plastics Directive explicitly mentions the equality of bio-based and biodegradable plastic compared to other materials. But this is not enough. The European Commission announced a dedicated framework which shall address bio-based and biodegradable material in a comprehensive manner, which means that definitions will play a very important role. Also, they are discussing the pros and cons of certain applications of bio-based and biodegradable material, and maybe they are also about to introduce some bans or for applications where it's not recommended to use this type of material. So as I said, there are opinions about what the upcoming regulation should include, and I will skip this here, but maybe you're interested in what could be the types of things that are regulated under such a policy framework, which is still expected today, this year, may also be start of next year. And I'm also quickly going over some national requirements, but you will also find this in the materials in the presentation that is provided through the Knowledge Hub. Now, what is the situation in Southeast Asian countries? We know that the bio-based and biodegradable plastics play a very important role. We have seen some numbers and volumes of the market already, and there is an important trend towards this material. However, the legislation, guidance, and comprehensive measures addressing bio-based and biodegradable plastics are lacking, especially in Malaysia and Thailand, where we are mainly working, and also appropriate waste management is not ensured. There's only one facility for organic waste treatment in total Thailand, which is located in Bangkok, and none of them in Malaysia. So the hopes that biodegradable plastics could be treated with the organic waste is a wrong hope, because there's no treatment facility available that has the conditions that this biodegradable material really degrades in a time span which is reasonable. And I should clearly be said that we do not expect any great advantages in terms of waste volume reduction, and no benefits also for other problems associated with plastic waste, for example, the littering, through a substitution of one single-use packaging through another, whether it's bio-based or not. And I'll again finally summarize why. With regards to bio-based plastics, there is a shift in the environmental burdens. We have seen that not all bio-based materials are 100% bio-based, so there's a high risk of confusion, and also certification is difficult to implement and not everywhere done. And with regards to biodegradable plastics, the fragmentation of plastics happens and takes place, but not the mineralization phase. So we will reach to or get microplastics and particles in the environment, and hazardous substances associated with these plastic types may leach and entail adverse effects. Also, the waste management infrastructure is not ready for these types of plastics, and we think that a substitution of one single-use option through another is not also in line with the waste hierarchy. Thus, what can we do? What is feasible? Where can we use it? So we have some final important to-dos, which is the prioritization of waste prevention. Of course, you hear this from us in quite some webinars, but with regards to the bio-based and biodegradable materials, we recommend that they help in separate wet and dry waste, but we do not recommend any other use for bio-based materials, the biodegradable materials. Also, in order to not adversely affect the food security, as I said, we recommend only the use of agricultural waste and agricultural byproducts as a basis for bio-based materials. The communication and transparency is very important, and we need also to let consumers understand the impacts of their choices. And we also, as we heard, that low organic waste treatment, low number of organic waste treatment facility is available in Southeast Asia. We recommend to invest in those management. And finally, a dedicated legislative proposal for these types of material is expected for Europe in the short. And we hope also to provide some guidance with regards to these topics to the countries where we are now discussing the topic with. And this is the final end of my presentation. Thank you for your interest.
Thank you, Clara. That's a very, very nice presentation from you. And I'm sure that a lot of information here are quite subject to discuss for Southeast Asian. So I would like to invite participants for any comments or questions. You can write it in the chat box, and we will discuss this after our second presentation from Mr. Sami Porteron. Mr. Sami Porteron is the program manager for Environmental Coalition of Standards in Belgium. Mr. Porteron, please, you may start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just share my screen. Can you confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So thanks a lot for your invitation to this event. I'm very pleased to speak today about this report that we wrote and published this year in July. I'll share a link to the report at the end of the presentation. As introduced, my name is Samy Porteron. I'm program manager at ECOS, which is the Environmental Coalition on Standards. And ECOS is an environmental NGO, international environmental NGO, I should say, based in Belgium, active in Europe, but also beyond. Our expertise is in standardization. We are quite a technically oriented NGO, meaning that we are present in standardization committees, both in Europe and at ISO level, so internationally. But we also work on policies and legislation. As an NGO, we are member-based, so we have a network of members to whom we disseminate information and receive support also in our advocacy. We are also a network of experts that support us in our advocacy. This is the list of the member organizations of ECOS, mainly in Europe so far, but we welcome organizations from abroad as well. And now to tell you a little bit about this report that we wrote this year. So first of all, it was a report that was supported by some research done by a consultancy company called SQ Consult. It was about 6 months of research where we looked at 6 different types of claims. So reusability, refillability, recyclability, recycled content, compostability, biodegradability, and bio-based content. Obviously, today I will focus more on the latter 3, so compostability, biodegradability, and bio-based content. And we looked at those claims on plastic products of 6 different types. We looked at bottles and jugs, plastic-based clothing, synthetic textiles, also sachets and pouches. So you can imagine, for instance, sauce sachets that you find in fast food chains, and pouches of liquids like soap or drinks, but also plastic bags and plastic film used for food, for instance, as well as plastic cutlery, cups, tableware, and finally diapers and wipes. When we analyzed those different products and claims, we used the fundamental principles developed by the United Nations Environmental Programme. These principles are for providing product sustainability information, and they're particularly useful for anyone trying to develop a claim or trying to understand claims and to make an assessment. So the criteria are 5-fold, but we only used 3 of them, which that I'm presenting here. So the first one is relevance, which essentially asks the question of whether the claim and the product itself are relevant to environmental objectives. So this touches on the relevance of both the claim and the product's characteristics. For instance, is it relevant for a wet wipe used in sanitary applications to be made from bio-based materials? Well, we argue that it's not relevant if the wipe will not biodegrade quickly when it enters the waste stream. Typically, the problem with wet wipes is that once they are flushed down the toilet, for instance, they are not going to biodegrade if they're partly made of plastic, even if they're made of bio-based plastic. So in that sense, the production or the use of a bio-based material may not be better than a fossil plastic. A second question that the relevance criterion asks is whether the claim on the product empowers the consumer to make a green choice. If the characteristic is irrelevant, then the claim is too. It can lead the consumer to think that they're doing something good for the environment, and that becomes greenwashing. It might hide some important issues with the products themselves, and that, for instance, consumers can be misled to think that a product made from natural materials is better for the environment, but it's not always true. The next criterion is reliability, and this asks the question of whether the claim is sufficiently substantiated and whether it involves third-party verification or certification. And the third criterion is clarity, asking the question of whether the wording or the product presentation are clear, whether the information is easily accessible, and whether claims support the public's understanding of the product's characteristic. So a quick overview of our findings. We found that about half of the claims that we looked at were misleading, which is more or less in line with some other assessments made, in particular by EU market authorities, which had conducted a sweep of products and claims found online. And they had found that about 40% of claims were potentially misleading. So this shows that there is globally a problem with regards to claims on products. And at least, or only 8 of the products that we looked into fulfill all the criteria out of the 82. Just a little a different way to present our results. We developed these claims awards, which put different types of products and their claims according to some of the sort of most ridiculous or most greenwash products that we found. So here you find one of the most ridiculous claims that we found was indeed biodegradable bottles. For us, this is nonsensical. Why make a bottle biodegradable? Do you need to throw the bottle out, or do you need to leave it out in the environment to consider it done with? It's much more interesting to consider circular pathways for the end of life of plastic bottles, so recycling or reuse. So now zooming in a bit more on those types of claims that we're concerned with today, you will certainly hear some things that were already said by Clara in her presentation. For us, biodegradability and compostability are often irrelevant because they're not in line with circularity, which is what we're concerned with when we talk about getting rid of single-use plastics, of course. So biodegradability claims tend to provide an incentive to the consumer to litter the product after they've used it, where a product should in fact be durable and recyclable. The circularity hierarchy tells us that in that order, it is better to reduce, maybe eliminate completely a product to avoid it being produced in the first place. Secondly, we want to reuse as much as possible. And thirdly, the products should be recyclable so that we don't lose the materials. Biodegradable plastics often contain the same harmful substances as conventional plastics, which themselves are not biodegradable. As well, biodegradability only occurs effectively if the right conditions are met. So you need the right mix of heat, humidity, and the presence of microorganisms, meaning that this is unlikely to work in the natural environment, and in particular in the ocean. We found some examples of claims like landfill biodegradable, for instance, for clothing. And for us, this seems particularly irrelevant and unhelpful in an era of fast fashion, where the accumulation of microplastics in the ocean is a huge problem. In that sense, consumers would be completely misguided to think that landfill biodegradability matters. In our report, we presented what we called a ideal claims checklist, which is the result of our work. We basically provide some simple advice, guidance for anyone looking into claims of these types. like biodegradability, compostability. And here, this is a little overview of the checklist for biodegradability claims. I won't go into this into detail, but it relates very much to what I was mentioning previously. And I will now just go to bio-based content claims, which we found also on a number of products, including plastic bottles, but also other items like like plastic cutlery, for instance. And here, a few of the main problems are some of the vague language that is used around bio-based plastics. We hear sometimes of bioplastic, which sounds a little bit like it might be biodegradable, but it could also simply refer to the fact that it's made of a bio-based material. We've also seen claims that bio-based plastics are not plastic at all, or that they're natural, which would call a consumer to think that it's better by nature compared to fossil-based plastics. But as mentioned previously, they tend to behave in the same way as fossil-based plastics in the environment. So this remains a problem, and they can also have other types of environmental impacts related to their production, even though you're not extracting fossil fuels and transforming them. You are still using agricultural processes or other processes that have different impacts. They tend to contain the same chemicals, and that means that actually, even though you have a bio-based plastic, and claim that the plastic contains bio-based material, you will still have the sort of same chemicals that are used to confer to plastic its properties. For instance, its plasticity, its malleability, and those chemicals are just as harmful as in a fossil-based plastic. And then there's the question of, as Clara raised, how much of the product is really bio-based. And here we see some different types of claims. Some companies telling us that up to a certain percentage of the product is bio-based. These types of claims are not very clear, obviously, telling us that it's only a maximum amount is quite poor quality of information. It would be much better to tell us what is the minimum. And at the same time, the methods to attribute bio-based content to products are generally allowing quite a lot of flexibility to brands, meaning that any particular product that you might find on a shelf claiming bio-based content may, in fact, not contain much of it at all. So this is the overview of the criteria or the advice that we developed as part of our claims checklist for bio-based content claims. I will not go into detail. You can have the slides and look through this. It's also in the report. And I just want to shift to the policy recommendations that came out of our report. So I would say in general, at ECOS, we feel that there is now sufficient best practice in guidelines like the guidelines provided by the UNEP, as I mentioned earlier. Now legislators really need to enact those principles into legislation in order to make claims more trustworthy, in order to ban misleading claims and dissuade corporate greenwashing, overall to more easily guide consumers towards sustainable purchases. So what we suggest is to eliminate loose and stretchable definitions in standards and legislation of what is bio-based, what is biodegradable. Indeed, the standards today are not sufficiently accurate with regards to how biodegradable products are used today, where they might end up, including in composting facilities, where often actually bio-based plastics, at least in some countries in Europe, are just manually taken out from the composting facility, even though the product is supposed to be compostable. So we recommend to use the ECOS ideal claims checklist to look into those claims and provide a clear pass-fail criteria for making relevant, reliable, and clear claims regarding characteristics of plastic products. The second recommendation is that policymakers should set clear rules on what can and cannot be claimed, banning misleading claims and vague marketing language, setting a whitelist of allowed claims, but also setting possibly mandatory information requirements for all products to display by default in the same manner. The third recommendation is to strengthen laws and sanctions against greenwashing. So setting high enough penalties to dissuade brands from using sustainability as a marketing argument. And number four, make sustainable products the norm. So let's take those products that are misleading and that have irrelevant environmental characteristics from the shelf and leave only those products that are really interesting from an environmental perspective. And for us, this means looking or making circularity the default. These are some of the key principles and tools that we suggest when developing policy and when looking into claims. So as mentioned, using existing guidelines like the ECOS ideal claims checklist is found in our report. Following the circularity hierarchy, reduce, reuse, recycle. Consider using environmental labeling that is harmonized. So imagine having the same symbols for different products instead of having, for instance, all these different recycling symbols and symbols that seem to suggest recycling but are not actually about recycling. We've seen some symbols also for compostability that have the chasing arrows in in Clara's presentation. In fact, sometimes these chasing arrows, so the triangle with the three arrows that follow each other, this are not actually suggesting recyclability. This is just a symbol sometimes of what type of plastic is being used, but it can also be just used by brands the way they want. So we suggest having harmonized environmental labeling internationally, since products also are produced in one place nowadays and exported for different markets. And finally, in the EU, we have this Sustainable Products Initiative that is being prepared, which is going to apply eco-design principles to all products. Eco-design being the conception of products with the idea of circularity from the design phase of the product, and this, if we think, is key. That will be the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll, as I said, share the link to the report, and I look forward to an interesting Q&A.
Thank you, Mr. Porteron. As a consumer, I would say it really is an alarm for us to be more conscious of the choices that are available in the market and not to get carried away with these labels. And now, as a break, we will move forward with the question and answer session. And there are already interesting discussions in the chat. Thank you for Clara, Mr. Marco Richie Jurgensen, Siddharth, that has already responded to some questions from our participants. And now we will move forward to the first question. This is about subsidy, if I'm not mistaken. There is a question from Mr. Supot Kanteto Pragan asking if the policymakers should not support or subsidize biodegradable plastic if they do not provide good enough compostable infrastructure. I think this question go to Clara. So Clara, please, if you have a response on this. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much for the question. We have seen some subsidies on biodegradable plastic, for example. We've heard of that already from. Sorry, there's very great noise. Can we mute all and then I unmute for? Ah. Is it possible that some?
Clara, please unmute yourself.
Yeah. Thank you. So we've heard of subsidies of biodegradable plastics, for example, in some Southeast Asian countries, and we think that they should not be supported. There should be a clear discussion about the real advantages of some applications. I think we will hear about some advantages, and there should also be the idea that some is discouraged, that that it should be even the other way around, not subsidized but discouraged to use biodegradable plastics in some cases.
Thank you. And I think we can go to the next question. The next question is, what if there is an alternative polymer that could have self-destruct mechanisms and based on predefined lifetime and mineralized under normal environment or soil conditions? Yeah, I think also Clara and Sammy can provide feedback on this. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've also pasted my view into the chat with regards to this destruction mechanism. There was a first attempt to do so with the oxo-degradable plastics. So they introduced these additives that react to the UV radiation of the sun, and through oxidation, this is why they called oxo-degradable. Through oxidation, they were supposed to degrade. However, we saw that this was, somehow a false solution because it did not provide what was promised. So I think I've seen also some attempts for using other types of additives that, for example, facilitates not only the oxidegradability, but that facilitates that the microorganisms like more the polymers, that they are really interested in breaking down the chemical bonds. However, I think we have to see what comes out of this innovation process, but I'm a little skeptical even if it was a good solution, then we still would need to change the materials. Not everything would be from this new material from the very beginning. There would also already be some hazardous substances, of course, because additives usually are some chemical. They are associated with chemical risks. So I'm skeptical, but I know that there is this innovation, and I think it has to be looked closely and critically to see the benefits really in the end.
Thank you. For Sammy, do you have also feedback on this?
Yeah, I would agree with what Clara mentioned. We've seen some examples of quote-unquote biodegradable plastics. Unfortunately, those plastics still contain the same additives, which do not biodegrade well and may leave some hazardous substances in the environment. So far, we haven't seen this sort of product, and there are reasons to think that this would be quite a difficult endeavor, and at the same time, it simply continues or prolongs the linear economy, which today is the cause of so much resource depletion. Also natural resources, not just fossil limited resources. Would argue that even natural resources today, under the current, let's say, economic settings, are under threat. We are depleting soils, we're overusing water, and considering the need to let's say sustain our societies with a growing population, we need to be very careful of those solutions that continue to pursue linearity. We think, for instance, of plastic bottles, which are produced in huge quantities. We would love to see alternatives to single-use plastic bottles that would be reusable. We've seen some examples of this done in Brazil, for instance, by some big beverage companies. Why not do this in other countries as well, and therefore reduce the amount of plastic that we produce, that we put on the market, and that ends up in the environment.
Thank you. I think the message is clear here. So in the next slide, I think we have some comments also from participants. One of them is from Indonesian Plastic Diet Movement, I believe, that we have to support the reuse movement and not single use, not ever, because biodegradable and bioplastics, they are still single use, and it will jeopardize the spirit of waste reduction initiative. Another thing, another feedback is that once again, waste prevention is the best solution. So thank you for your insights. I think we are on the same road here. And before going forward, there is a participant raising hands, and Miss Mila, please, if you have a question, please unmute yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Oh,
you so much.
sorry,
No,
Mr.
no problem.
Amila.
It's okay. Yeah, no problem. Like it's my name is Vikram. Like sorry, like I have some difficulty of accessing the chat box, so that's why I raised my hand. So I'm based on Japan, and my background is life cycle assessment. Even though now on more policy side, like a few maybe my question maybe for Clara. So and thank you so much for nice summary on the bioplastics. And a few years ago, I saw like within next by 2030, the market share of bioplastic will increase up to 40% or something. But maybe it's a few years ago. And now I think European Union and so now new policy kind of measures are coming. So is there any prediction based like according to your experience in Europe, like how much market share in future for bioplastics? That's one question. So can I add another one more? Yes, thank you. The other one is like LCA. So life cycle assessment, I think maybe at the moment it's very difficult to for the policy like decision making because the conventional plastics we cannot include the marine impacts of conventional plastics into the LCA and also bioplastics. So it's kind of unfair sometimes when we compare with bioplastics. So what's your thought on this? Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Amila.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think the first one I'm not really comfortable to answer because it's a very difficult to predict the future on how much will be the market shares. It will also really depend on the new law that it's going to be presented, how strict they're going to be, for example, and also with some initiatives, for example, the so-called Circular Plastic Alliance. They are focusing very much on design for recycling, also recycled content targets, and this is not feasible. Both measures are not cannot be implemented together with biodegradable and bio-based plastics because you cannot have recycled content really. I think this is very much changing the market, and I cannot really predict what's going to be the share of those kinds of plastics. That's for the first question. For the second, you're totally right that LCA is very difficult to compare conventional and bio-based and biodegradable plastic, and this is mainly because of the biodiversity issue that I mentioned. You know, there is the category of land use and land use change. These are two LCA categories which start to tackle the issue of of biodiversity losses. But for example, I think the toxicity and ecotoxicity categories, they are not as reliable, for example, because the background data may not be very good in some cases. So you're totally right. As for the comparison of those two kinds of plastic, from our point of view, you should also refer to other measures to assess this compare. For example, to look at biodiversity loss, to look at hazardous substances. Also, the waste management and the recyclability is not covered by LCA, so we prefer recyclable packaging, for example, and this does not have any credit through the LCA methodology. So in this case, we really have somehow the limitations of LCA, which we discussed in a previous event also, that also come here on the stage.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Clara. We still have 5 minutes to discuss 2 more questions. And the first question is about, is there any reputable blacklist of claims and certification for bioplastics? I think that is for Semi-Portrait. Thank you.
So in our report, we've listed some claims that we found. We've not attributed those claims to the brands that made them. If that's what you're looking for, I'm not aware of a list, but this is one of the recommendations that we make to actually for governments to start listing claims and allowing certain types of claims that use the clearest language and that make the most relevant claims from an environmental perspective, but also to blacklist a certain number of claims that might be using vague language that are particularly confusing. In terms of certification schemes, again, we did not make an assessment of all the different schemes, and I wouldn't be able to point you to a particular report that has done this. I think this is all work that would be interested in doing, but yeah, for now I'm not aware of an existing assessment.
Thanks, Sami. I think to put reputable blacklist also need to be taken quite carefully. So thanks for the explanation. And then there is a following questions that is from the same participants asking particularly on the credibility of the BSI PAA's 2017 by the British Standard Institution. So do you have any comment on this? Thank you.
Sami, do you know? Because I've not come across this standard. Maybe you know.
I'm not particularly knowledgeable about the British Standards Institute's standards, I must say. We tend to follow what goes on more at the EU level. I know that there are some flaws with some of the standards related to biodegradability, but I can't say I'm able to go into the details of them.
Thanks. Yeah.
In general, if I can add something with regards to standards on biodegradability, often the issue, as I started to evoke, is that those standards tend not to take into account the real life conditions of biodegradable products. So they might suggest composting, for instance, over a longer period than what composting facilities actually use for composting. And as we saw in Clara's presentation, the biodegradable plastics are often biodegraded over periods of several weeks or months. But composting facilities tend to have a quicker turnover in order to make compost. And that tends to be the issue with biodegradability standards today.
This was the question that we mentioned about the standard, and thank you for your feedback. And I think that will be the end of our Q&A session, and we are running on time, thankfully. And now we slowly start to the second session of this dialogue series. And the next presenter, the next speaker will be Mr. Marco Ricci Jurgensen. Mr. Ricci Jurgensen is the chair of ECN, the European Compost Network Task Group on Compostable Plastics. Mr. Ricci Jurgensen, you may start the presentation. Thank you.
Yes, good morning or good afternoon, first of all, since most of the participants are based in Asia. I hope you can hear me, and I'm just going to share my slides if it works. I hope so. Just tell me if you can see them, please.
Yeah, we can see this.
Okay, very well. Just another second and I will be ready. Okay, I hope you can see the presenter, the slideshow mode and not the presenter version. Anyway, it doesn't change. First of all, thank you for inviting me and us. I have the honor to chair one of the task groups or technical groups of the ECN regarding how some types of compostable plastics can be managed as industrial recycling facilities for organic waste. Just a comment about myself. If you Google about myself, you will find me under different, let's say, organizations which I'm working for or which I'm engaged in. Today, I'm talking on behalf of ECN. ECN is in Europe an umbrella organization. So it is the place, virtually or physical, where composting and biogas organization meet to align and to confront each other about what's happening in selected member countries. Currently, ECN has members from almost every European country, and its members are mainly managing composting and AD facilities, anaerobic digestion. And so we are somehow representing the backbone of the organic recycling infrastructure in Europe. ECN has some very clear objectives. It's not collecting compostable plastics, but I will get back to that. It's strengthening the legal framework and the European policy in order to increase separate collection of organic waste and composting and anaerobic digestion. It helps to develop a market for these products, biogas and compost. And it is committed, and all its members are committed since the very early beginning, and this sector has more than 30 years of experience in Europe. It is committed to quality. That means that our members want to produce a quality product that can be safely used in agriculture, soil, in potting mixtures, and so on. It's worth understanding this because it has been told to you already during one of the previous presenters. You need an infrastructure to manage different types of waste. If we talk about organic waste in a town, a city, or a country, you have a number of different sources that can be collected separately and sent to composting and anaerobic digestion. And of course, this means that when we talk about a recycling infrastructure, in our sector, we talk about composting. These are just some key numbers from one specific country, which is Italy, where you see there is a significant number of composting facilities. And the circular economy on organic waste means we produce a solid output, an organic fertilizer, if you want. More recently, all over Europe, let's say a second generation of facilities has been developed, which is able to extract biogas and biomethane out of organic waste. Normally, these facilities are more recent, are more capital intensive, more complex to manage, and so on. I'm not going into the detail, but just be aware that for recycling organic waste, you need an infrastructure, and this infrastructure today in Europe is roughly of about 4,300 industrial facilities. So without a waste treatment infrastructure, we cannot talk about recycling organic waste, and we cannot talk about recycling some parts of compostable plastics into these facilities. Last but not least, since I know that there are a number of experiences in this sector ongoing in Asia, be aware that there is a relatively higher number of composting facilities in Europe, so the green ones, compared to other types of facilities, because composting is a scalable technique. You can go from home with a home composter or community composting to small scale facilities, up to modular, and up to highly industrialized facilities, which are able to treat 200,000 to 500,000 tons per year. Our sector looks at this slide, which we have seen also previously, by focusing on compostable plastics. So we prefer to define them as compostable plastics, means that they are biodegradable, and they can be either bio-based or non-bio-based, which means plastics based on fossil fuels. When we refer to compostable plastics, at least in Europe, we refer always to a European standard, which has been mentioned before. But let me stress that this standard is relatively similar to other standards that you can find worldwide. And normally, I must say, these standards include also toxicity tests. So these standards are there to verify that the product is biodegradable, is compostable or disintegrates, and that the compost produced has no negative or adverse effects on plant growth compared to a compost which is produced without introducing compostable plastics into the input mixture. I have heard a number of things. So if we rely on specific standards, we have to consider that these kinds of bioplastics can be treated only in industrial composting facilities. They cannot be treated in the open environment, as we said before. They cannot be treated in home composting and so on. And normally, but I will get back to that, if we look at specific type of items like bags designed for enhancing separate collection of bio waste, well, normally these bags do compost in the range we expect in facilities. The question of facilities treating organic waste for very short times is true, it is there. But very often we have to say that very short treatment times are unable to manage compostable plastic correctly. And I would say very often also the compost they produce is very fresh, so has limited agronomic application. Let's get back to one point. Why do we talk about compostable plastics in connection to industrial composting? Well, for a simple reason. When we have to collect organic waste in towns and cities, and organic waste makes up more than 40 to 50% of municipal solid waste arisings in a city, well, we are looking for tools to make the separate collection convenient, so user-friendly for waste producers, for households, for commercial activities. Now, the problem is that if we use plastic bags, conventional plastic bags, we keep a significant impurity inside the final product, being it compost, being it digestate. And we do not want conventional plastics to get back to our soils. We have already too much of them on our soils due to a number of sources, air drifts, agriculture, and so on. So since about 30 years, we were looking for suitable bags, first of all, bags as a tool for ameliorating separate collection. This is a picture from Munich, and here you can see the two types of polymers which can be compatible with composting. Paper, for sure, and compostable plastics according to the European standard, which I was mentioning to you. There are a number of side effects when you go for distributing compostable liners to households, and this has been, I would say, proven, not tested, for the last 30 years in municipal solid waste management in Europe. These are some pictures from a trial done by some German colleagues in Germany a number of years ago, which shows that when you hand over compostable liners to households and tell them not to use conventional plastics, well, what you get is a rise in separate collection of food waste and a reduction in contamination in terms of non-compostable materials. And unfortunately, this factor is not considered very often in life cycle analysis. So we are not looking only at the outside on the back, we're looking at the inside, which makes the most in terms of LCA analysis. Using compostable liners as a tool for enhancing separate collection of kitchen waste or bio-waste, there are different types of namings in Europe, has been applied in millions of inhabitants throughout Europe. Probably the most well-known case is the city of Milan, which is currently the area where most food waste or kitchen waste is collected separately and sent to industrial recycling. And in that case, by using compostable bags, the city is able to divert, so to switch from disposal to recycling roughly 86% of all food waste generated in the city. So we're talking about something which is around today about 110 kilo per capita. It's not an isolated case. If you go to other European cities, and I keep my presentation focusing on Europe only, not going to other regions, you will find similar approaches, both standardized or as a trial in different cities around Europe. So, first of all, compostable plastic items are normally divided by our sector into, I would say, 3 types. The first type, which is the one which generated, let's say, the interest for compostable plastic, is we were looking for tools that are functional to ease the users in the separate collection of biowaste. Of course, the market and the marketing developed itself independently from us, and this has been shown very clearly in the previous presentation. So today there are a number of more complex items like compostable catering, packaging, and even more complex packaging for the food sector and for other sectors. And I will get back to that. Not all of these items can be sent automatically to composting. Of course, there are some items where compostable plastics can give and can serve as an interesting solution where we are unable to separate the plastics from the organic waste. And this is an example of coffee capsules. I'm not a fan of coffee capsules personally. I'm living in Italy, so I brew my coffee with a mocha. But of course, one of the problems is in this case, you have an item which consists of 20% packaging and 80% coffee powder. And if we are unable to split the two, we are unable to recycle the coffee powder. So in this case, there are interesting solutions which allow to recycle the organics by having a plastic packaging, which is compatible with an industrial process. Saying this, ECN's, the European Composting Network's positions towards compostable plastic is that, first of all, compostable plastics are never to be considered as a solution for littering. This has been said before, and it's worth stressing it now. And that acceptance and inclusion of these types of compostable plastic depends very strictly on the local composting infrastructure. So you need to have composting plants which are prepared, designed also to include some types of compostable packaging. And for ECN, composting cannot be considered as the main option for recycling any type of plastic packaging item. Even if I must say, one of the speakers before said that recycling of compostable packaging through composting is not recycling. I'm sorry, the European Framework Directive, Article 22, conceives this as an option. Composting is recycling. But the main purpose, again, for us of including compostable items into industrial composting is to increase the quality of our feedstock, which is bio-waste, for composting. And this is very important. So in that case, it can help. And since the time I'm allocated is relatively short, I will just keep to some snapshots. I know there are a lot of bans on the use, for example, of PE bags and shoppers worldwide. And there are a number of organizations which are monitoring these bans, and I'm not going again into the detail. But let me show, because this was one of the questions which was risen before, if bans or subsidies on compostable plastics are reasonable. Personally, I think subsidies are not reasonable, but I can show you where bans can be effective in reaching prevention and ameliorating the situation for separate collection of organic waste. I fully agree that we have to prevent single-use plastics. And one of the countries in Italy which first banned conventional polyethylene bags and shoppers was Italy. Italy introduced a ban in 2012, so almost 10 years ago. And the Italian legislation basically allows supermarkets, shops only to use either compostable plastic bags, compostable according to the European standard, and in addition, the Italian law requests a minimum amount of a renewable quota to produce these bags, but this is a detail, or paper, or reusable plastic bags. Well, what is very interesting from these data, and that's why I want to share them with you, as you can see, once the law was introduced and gradually enforced, compostable shoppers increased in Italy from a minimum amount to actually 70% of the markets. Of course, conventional shoppers reduced but didn't disappear. We know that laws are difficult to enforce, and in each country very often we have very good laws but a weak enforcement. But very interestingly, this slide tells us that the absolute amount of shoppers of bags reduced, which means that we got an effect of changing the habit of consumers. And I think this is very important when we consider the production of packaging and of single-use plastics. In this case, the ban was designed having in mind that the second life of a compostable shopper is to be used as a tool for the separate collection of organic waste, of kitchen waste. And since Italy has an industrial infrastructure for composting, which was already using these kinds of shoppers for decades, we were somehow ready to do that. In this case, we have a win-win situation. Households and cities get a tool for making separate collection of organic waste. We reduce the number of conventional shoppers, which we are sure won't degrade in any composting or AD facility. And what is even more important, we get a net reduction in time of the use of these kinds of tools, which means that people went back to using reusable shoppers and bags for making their purchases. Similar approaches have been followed in other European countries. I just quote our Austrian colleagues, where the composting organization has made pressure and at the end was successful in asking that all types of thin wall bags used for grocery stores are either compostable or nothing. Again, these very thin bags are designed to be used as liners in kitchen caddies for collecting food waste. So this was a very brief overview of what can be done carefully when you want to recycle some types of bioplastics, compostable plastic items in industrial composting. For further reading, I do suggest, and these are included in my presentation, 3 documents. One has been issued by the International Solid Waste Organization, ISWA, which is showing the importance of tackling organic waste in cities. And I know this is a debate ongoing in Asia. I've been to an international conference in Malaysia 3 years ago, and I know that you are considering and you need to build up consistent infrastructure for tackling the issue of organic waste produced in cities. The second document, if you are keen to have more data about bio-waste collection and recycling in Europe, have a look at the ECN status report for 2019. And even if it's a relatively old document published in 2015, there is an overview about the link between compostable and biodegradable plastics and the collection and treatment of organic waste, again, issued by ISWA International. It's relatively old, but the main key elements, if you look at this at the perspective of a decision maker or of a waste manager, I think they might be helpful to deepen your knowledge about this aspect of compostability and biodegradable plastics. Well, that was my presentation. I hope I stayed into the allocated time slot, and I'm open for your questions afterwards. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.
Thank you, Mr. Richie. It was really good in timing, and I hope you can still stay with us for the Q&A sessions. We already have some questions for you. And for the next presentation, it will be coming from Dr. Kringsak. Dr. Kringsak is the Vice President for Downstream Market Development, PTT Global Chemical Public. Dr. Kringsak, you may start your presentation. You have 15 minutes for the presentation. Thank you very much.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Let me share my, or you would like to open for us? Sorry. I manage my slide myself, right?
Sir, however you like it, we can also share for you.
It can be both. Okay, you can share for us. Thank you. Okay, thank you. First of all, I have to thank for GSS to give us an opportunity to share what we done on the biobased and biodegradables. First of all, let me introduce about my GC. We are PTT GC is a private sector. We are a company, public company, doing refinery, olefins, aromatics, and also polymer plastic business in Thailand, in Southeast Asia. And actually, GC, we come from 4 petroleum and petrochemical company, and we are consolidated into PTT GC just last 10 years ago. We come from refinery, we come from 2 olefin plants and 1 aromatic plants, and we integrate to downstream petrochemical polymers, plastic polyolefins. In terms of the sustainable portfolio for our GC, we actually start since before we are consolidated into PTT GC. On those days, 2005, we used the name PTT Global Chemicals. We start by not really plastic, but we start from TGC UC 2005. We produce fatty alcohol, biodiesel. We use palm oil base for biochemicals and biofuels. We produce from our palm oil business. And after that, 2011, we start PTT MCC by our mother company, PTT, joint venture with Mitsubishi Chemical, produced the first bio-PBS in Thailand. And I think it's the first bio-PBS in the world with the capacity of 20,000 metric ton a year. It's bio-based and compostable bioplastic PBS. And at the same year, 2011, we invest in a share as a shareholder in NatureWorks. I think you're familiar with this company in USA. We JV with the Cargill, 50% shareholder with the capacity of the 150 metric tons, 1,000 metric tons a year. And next slide, please. And just 2018, we announced another next move of our bio industry in our group company, GGC, and we joint venture with KTIS. It comes from Gaset Thai International Sugar Corporations. As I mentioned, in 2005, GGC started in palm oil-based chemicals and palm oil-based fuels. And now next move, we are going to utilize our sugar canes because Thailand, we have a lot of cane sugar business. So that we utilize our cane business to further in the biochemicals. Next year, 2022, we are going to have an ethanol plant at the first phase of the bio complex. And also we have a biofuel, bioenergies. And that's the beginning of our next step. And we are going to expand to the second phase about the biochemicals and bioplastic, including what already announced the PLA next phase in Thailand. But not only bio business. Actually, we are talking in Thailand about the BCG, bio-circular and green dimensions. What the past we have already, I show you about the bio business in our group. But the next move, we are also expand from bio to C, circular. In 2019, we announced with the joint venture with the company named Alpa, the leading recycle technology from Europe, with JV and attributes a company named Envigo to invest in the recycling plants, which is the high premium qualities of the recycle. We are in the beginning of next year, 2022. This plant will be started with the capacity of RPET recycle PET 30,000 tons a year, and with the RHDPE 15,000 tons a year. So this is the high premium that can be used for like food packaging again, like bottles to bottles. And not only in terms of the circular, but also GC has a clear policy in moving towards green companies. Our CEO has announced that we are going to net zero by 2050, and we are going to developing a lot of plan in order to move the way forward to our net zero achievement. Next slide, please. Hello. Next slide, please.
Sarah, can you support with the slides? Thank you.
Hello.
One moment, Dr. Kringsang, I will take over.
Maybe I share from my part, okay?
It's also fine, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
If you could turn on the slideshow mode, that would be great.
A moment, please. It's okay?
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Thank you
So
very
that's
much.
all the background of our companies about the BCG directions of our sustainable business. So let's come on the pro and cons of the bioplastics. I think in terms of the bioplastic, it's clear that we use the renewable and sustainable resource, comparing with the fossil fuel sources that conventional plastic utilize. And another pro is we lower carbons comparing to the conventional and the biodegradable and compostable is one of the pro, I think, in terms of the benefit in in the application that we difficult to manage the waste. I mean, after we are difficult to recycle, shall we say? In terms of the cons, I think it's costly you may know that bioplastic is more expensive comparing to the conventional one because of the cost and because of the economy of scale and because of it's new to the market. Our customers are not familiar with the productions of this kinds of raw material, so that make it higher in terms of cost comparing with the conventionals. And actually, I think we have to accept that bioplastic is not the complete solution. We are not the absolute solution for the pollutions. We need to manage it, and not all can be, solved by utilize bioplastic. We just a part of a solution for the pollution or environmental issues. And bioplastic also needs an afterlife waste management. We cannot let it like unmanaged for waste management. And bioplastic in action, I think in order to solve about the bioplastic issue, I think all parties, governments, private sector, and especially consumer has to all together hand in hand in order to help these issues, because it's a new market, both in terms of the technology and even the consumer may not familiar with how to behave after we use or we consume these kinds of products. And also, I think one of the very important issue is waste management, both technology, facility, and system. I think all these parameters has to be together in order to solve the issues of the life cycle management for the bioplastic. Let me give an example. We just has about 2 years, we do a pilot projects with a coffee shop named Chai Tung Coffee as a closed loop success story in Thai coffee shop. From our bioplastic products, we need to design. It's not only sell as product. We also have to help this coffee shop in terms of the waste management system. We collaborate with the universities in order to help us collect and do the composting size and utilize it at the circle to make it end-to-end management process. I think this kinds of waste management as we have to manage all the process since the beginning to the end. And the suggested solution for I think this is not only bioplastic, but for all plastic products. 3R, reuse, recycle is a priority for sure. But I think in some cases that in some product, as mentioned, like coffee pots, it may not easy to make a recycle one. And just before my presentation, I heard that in European you have like 50 something, right, in terms of organic waste or food waste. But in ASEAN, like in Thailand, our food is more organic food is more than 60%. Because of tropical, we eat something like soup. Like you may know that in Thailand we famous in like tom yums. With our kind of food is quite, a lot of organic waste, shall we say? So that we also need to manage this kind of waste that for plastic packaging that contaminate with this kinds of waste is quite difficult to manage, to recycle, something like that. So that I think in terms of design the solution for the waste management, I think we have to think about the eco system, eco lifestyle, and eco products. And we design it since the beginnings of when we launch or we make an ideation for the concept of product. We have to think it not only the product as its product and utilize. We have to think beyond it. We have to imagine of how it's gonna be after people or consumer use it, how it gonna end up in the landfills, or we try to make it like reuse as more as or recycle as most as possible. I think that the biocompostable is just like you see in the slide, it's just the small triangle. I think if we can reduce it first, we have to think of reduce. We can reuse it first. After we can think of reuse, recycle, and recover. But in some product, it's difficult to do all those solutions. We come up with the disposable or compostable way, and we think of the biocompostable plastic. If you see the volume of the market size of the plastic total, approximately 300 million tons of plastic utilized a year. For bioplastic capacity is less than 2 or 3 million tons, it's less than 1% comparing to the conventional plastic. So that's why I mentioned bioplastic is not the total solution. We just only less than 1% of total volume we consume plastic a year. So that other solution has to be, deployed first. But just some application that is difficult to do other things, we just think of the compostable. For example, like in food, like you see paper coat, difficult to recycle. Like straw in Thailand, we also have some food smoothie that also need like straw. In this kind of thing, we think the compostable is maybe a solution, like tea bag, like coffee pot. That also other application difficult to recycle. But for those products and other that are easier to recycle or recyclable, so we try to make it first, like water bottles in this slide show. And that's why GC has invested in like Envigo joint venture with Alpa in order to do this kind of thing first. We try to recycle plastic bottles, plastic bag, and try to make it have another life after consume again. So that for the product that we can recycle first. Just only that the one we difficult to make it real in terms of the recycle, not in terms only the technical, but in terms of the management system, like it's contaminated with waste food, something like that. We think of
Dr. Kringsak, apologies for interrupting. You have 1 minute left for your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, that also almost my presentation. This is just an example. GC, we have like, because we think of the end-to-end process, like, so that we have the waste management. We launched this year, the program, we call it U-Turn, in order to set the collecting system, in order to make a waste management collections. And we start with the drop points of 55 drop points this year, and we are going to expand. And this is another areas that we also do, like in terms of the upcycling waste management. So we do many things in order to like find many solutions to match with the products or application that it should be, think of the total solution. So that's all my present. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kringsak. Thank you also for your presentation and sharing what you have done with PTTGC. And now, before we are going forward for the question and answer session, I would like to ask for some support from the participants here to make our dialogue series better. Please help us rate to improve our event. And you can do it by scanning this barcode, and you will be directed directly to our feedback page. And for the question and answer, let's try to do it one by one. I think these are the comments and feedback from the participants that we have received. Thank you very much. And also some provided comments as well. And some questions have already been answered actually in the chat box. So I will encourage participants to go there and look again on the chat box. And I think this one doesn't have the answer yet. And I would like to invite our speakers to answer this question. The question comes from Mr. Support Kateto Pragran. And I hope you can already see the question in the monitor. It's about if we recover energy from municipal solid waste-based biogas, we still release CO2 to the environment. Can we say that biogas from compostable facility doesn't provide positive carbon advantage over conventional natural gas? Or is it just a misunderstanding? Please, I invite Mr. Richie to provide your feedback. Thank you.
I don't know if I understood the question correctly. The point is, if you produce biogas from bio-waste, so mainly from kitchen waste or food waste, is a biogas from biogenic origin, so it's carbon neutral, if this was the question. So it's for sure preferable to use biogas instead of natural gas in terms of CO2 emissions. That's why all over Europe, the current trend is to upgrade biogas to biomethane or green methane quality. There are different wording for that. I hope this answers the question.
Thank you, Mr. Richie. For the sake of time, I think if you need further discussion, Mr. Support, we can do this after this event. And then we will move to the next question now. I think the question comes from our colleague here, Siddharth Prakash, and he would like to have some confirmation about the different waste management operators treat the compostable garbage bags differently. So I will invite again Mr. Richie for this. Thank you.
So the first part is sure, compostable plastic bags can have a second life used as liners for separate collection, especially of kitchen waste or food waste. The second part regarding treatment is wrong. Facilities, composting facilities do pre-treat organic waste because it is coming in with non-compostable glass, metals, and of course conventional plastics. So it depends very much on the type, on the outline of the single facilities. If facilities have a very clean feedstock, the bags are not sorted out at all. In some facilities, due to the pre-sorting or to the refinement, but due to the pre-sorting, the rejects are eliminated from the composting process. And parts of the bags can also be eliminated, and then they may go either to incineration or to disposal into landfill. This depends on the local condition. But saying this, don't forget one message. A bag of 7 to 10 grams, a bio bag of 7 to 10 grams can contain 2 to 3 kilos of food waste. Again, if you look at the environmental performance, what is important is that we get the 2 or 3 kilos of food waste into composting and anaerobic digestion and not into dumping sites or landfills. So you need a more holistic approach.
Thank you, Mr. Richie. And I think there is a follow-up from this question. There is a follow-up question after this, but we will go there later to have some opportunity for Dr. Kringsak. Dr. Kringsak, there is a question especially requested to you about the private public sector to take part in life cycle management of biodegradable and bio-based plastic. And what do you have in mind? How public sector can support? If you can provide your feedback, please. Thank you very much.
Yes, actually, I think the public sector is an important part, as I mentioned, in the waste management. And first of all, we have, as I mentioned, also is kept to, I mean, bioplastic product is quite new to the consumers and to the public, and also to the governance, to the government sector. So that all this kind of thing, I think first step, we have to educate them, especially in Thailand. It's a beginning process, it's a beginning phase. I think we need to educate the public first how to separate, I mean, the bioplastic and conventionals. And in Thailand, I think I saw some question before this is about the oxo degradable like plastic. And that's also one of our pain point today because of it also be claimed as the degradable together. And it's quite difficult for us to manage separately. So that this kind of thing, I think the public sector and knowledge on bioplastic is needed, so that we need to educate them, and we need, I mean, in terms of the waste management, we need to separate like waste from organic waste and dry waste, shall we say. We need to manage it. Some trash bins maybe recycle, some maybe needs to composting site, something like that. So that this kind of thing, I think is, I mean, public sector is the very important role. And in terms of the government, I think it's also important because, as I mentioned, even though the oxo degradable in Thailand, for example, the government announced to ban it since the beginnings of this year, but it still have like it not legal, right? But we still see this kind of thing in the market and putting the mark of the biodegradable, and consumer are not, I mean, they will, I mean, for sure that consumer, normal people will cannot distinguish it, what is the real one, compostable. So that the government should be, I mean, take care of this issue seriously. Otherwise, it will, I mean, contaminate. What we think it should be compost, it may contaminate with other recycle. In another way, what is the should be recycled is contaminate with the biodegradable. I think the ultimate solution, I think we need to separate waste before manage. And governments, I mean, need to educate both public sector and also private sector.
Thank you, Dr. Kringsak. Yeah, couldn't be agree more. I think that's the solution that we have to do first, and I see also Mr. Richie nodding approval. So I really regret that we are now already running out of time. So I would encourage further discussions through our Knowledge Hub. Please register yourself in the Knowledge Hub and just send us your other questions that you are willing to discuss. And also other word from my side, Please help us improving this session by filling in the questionnaires that my colleagues here already put the link on the chat box. That will be highly appreciated. And last words, I would like to thank you very much for all the speakers here. Thank you for your time, for the knowledge, and for the sharing. And also for the participants that stay with us for 2 hours long with all the very important discussions and comments. Thank you very much, and I hope we will see you again in our dialogue series in February. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.